Shami, Assistant Director and Chief of Financial Policy Division in the Institute for Capacity Development at the International Monetary Fund. We also have Hannah Wood, Program Director, Climate and Environment at UBS Optimum Foundation. We also have Jan Bachner, who is current Secretary General of Monaco Ocean Foundation, and Nathalie Hilmy, leader of Environmental Economics Section du Centre Scientifique de Monaco. So we are starting to give the floor to Ralph Shami, who is talking us from Washington. So I don't know if you can hear us, Ralph.
Hi, Patricia. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go on.
Excellent. Okay, I will just go into my presentation, but before I do that, I'd like to thank you, the Mary Foundation, and of course Monaco for the invite. Let me try to share my presentation. All right. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes, Ralph, thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right. So what I wanted to share with you in this interesting session on where is the blind spot in all of this, how is it that nature is not visible to the economy? By putting it more on a positive note and say what I'm going to advocate for is a new nature-based economic framework. And so whenever you talk about something like this, you want to build a framework, people say on what pillars? Where do you start? Well, where we're going to start is with the science. By now, we all know, especially at COP26, finally it dawned on everybody that the oceans, are key to holding, climate change in check, and also in terms of dealing with the risks to the natural capital. So the science tells us how important the oceans are, including the phytoplankton. And the oceans also tell us about the incredible role of the great whales in creating a biosystem within the ocean. But if we're talking about climate change, of course, everybody wants to talk about the carbon part of this. So these great whales capture so much carbon on their bodies, and they're negatively buoyant. So when they die, services for which prices exist in the market, and you come up with these numbers. So now what you really have is what you're really saying is there are these assets. And when you say the word assets, financial people start to pay attention. What do you mean by asset? Well, these are natural assets and they have value. But despite all this wonderful talk, nature is still under threat, as we know very well. All species are under attack, and no one is immune from it, be it species or be it blue carbon assets. So, what do you really need in order to change, in order to to get over this blind spot, to bring the light into that blind area, that dark area? You need the policy action. You have the science, you have the valuation, you need the legal aspect of it. You need to basically decide for markets to take this seriously, to say, you want me to take the nature seriously, you want me to think to bring it into my world, then I need to understand, is this is an asset that I can create services around it, that I can insure it? Well, then the first question is going to be, who owns this asset? Who's managing this asset? On whose behalf is it being managed? So the first thing we really need to do beyond the science and the valuation is the legal side, the legal rights. Then we need to monitor the asset, enforce penalties, and create incentives for better behavior. As far as if you ask me for examples of who has conferred legal rights, well, I have beautiful news for you. Chile, as recently as few days ago, few weeks ago, decide in the as they're forming their new constitution, they have now new language in Article 9 that basically confers rights to nature. New Zealand has already conferred personhood on its rivers. Costa Rica has conferred personhood on its bees. So there are many examples now of countries realizing the value of nature to their economies, aside from the intrinsic value itself of nature, and acting in a way to actually bring all of this together. Now, once you have all of that, what can you do with it? Well, here's what you can do with it. From the supply side, you see, there's a whole world out there. If you just think of the carbon market itself, there's a whole world that is demanding carbon offset, carbon reduction. Okay, so that's what I'm pointing here as the demand side. But the question is, where will the supply? Well, the supply sits in many countries that have protected its nature or is engaged in protecting its nature and regrowing it. But in order to meet the demand, this insatiable demand for carbon zero and carbon negative, your governments need to do the following. They need to undertake a scientific assessment of what is the type of nature that they have and the intensity of it. Next, they need to do the market evaluation of it, as I just described. Then there has to be the third step, which is the legal recognition of the rights of nature. Once this is done, you've now created, with these three steps, moves natural assets, they become natural capital, it becomes financial capital, which goes on the balance sheets of the countries or the owners of these assets. Once they enter the balance sheets of these, then they are no longer invisible. There is no blind spot, because then at that point, the markets look at this and say, okay, so these are assets, and we know how to insure them, how to create all kinds of services around them. Now, having said that, since we are talking about nature, in many cases, these are species, they are sentient species, there has to be principles for guiding how we engage with markets. And here I'd like to stress these two things before I end my talk, is that what we are not advocating here is the sale of the assets. We're talking about the selling of the services of the assets. So when we talk about, if it is whales, we're selling the carbon services of the whales, never the whales themselves, or the elephants, or any of the blue carbon assets. They remain owned by the countries where they are domiciled or where they happen to be visiting. So the two principles for guiding this kind of market, nature market, has to be that the money that comes, if it is carbon offset or biodiversity offset, the market comes back, the money comes back in from the sale of the services to look after nature in perpetuity. We have an ethical, moral obligation towards nature and its species. Second, that the money comes in to look after the stewards of nature, and in this case, these are the indigenous and the local population, and by creating meaningful employment and meaningful talking about a win-win-win model. Three wins, not only one. Because nature wins, because you are protecting, restoring, regenerating it. The seller of the carbon services wins because this is the government now where the natural asset is sitting. They get revenue, they get fiscal savings, among many other things. The local communities, as I just described, they get sustainable income, meaningful employment, reduction in mobility, you stabilize people in their land. The buyers of the carbon offsets, if we're just talking about the carbon service, they get to reduce their carbon footprint, they get to meet their ESGs, they get to hit the SDGs at least 1, 8, 10, 13, 14, 15. They move from being consumers of negative carbon to being investors in nature. Okay, of course, that will help develop the capital markets also, which will enhance liquidity, create better pricing for all of the natural assets. When we manage to do this, and all this needs is really what's left is political will to do so, we would have achieved sustainable and inclusive economic development. Thank you.
Now, thank you very much, Ralph. You certainly have studied this issue for many years now also with us, so thank you to present this theoretical concept that it's so important for us. Now I'm going to give the floor to Hannah Wood. Hannah is the Program Director of Climate and Environment at UBS Optimus Foundation. She joined UBS Optimus Foundation in June 2020 as Climate and Environment Program Director. She spent before 15 years living and working in East Africa, based in Tanzania and working across sub-Saharan Africa. She focused on climate communication, climate adaptation and mitigation, and wildlife conservation. She held role with a diverse group of organizations, including the UK Foreign Office and a large hospitality group. Hannah holds a Master of Science in Ecology and Management of the Natural Environmental from Bristol University and a Bachelor in Geography from Newcastle University, and she also holds a certificate in Business Sustainability Management from Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. Welcome, Hannah. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for having me here today. Just to touch on financial institutions, really, and the role of banks in helping global ocean conservation. So, I mean, globally, major ocean sectors like tourism, shipping, fishing, and of course, aquaculture and marine renewable energy collectively contribute to what we call the blue economy. And the market value of this is estimated at around $3 trillion a year, which is around 5% of global GDP. It's projected to increase and estimated to up to about $3 trillion by 2030, and some of the ocean industries are likely to grow faster than that average rate. But every year, the global community bears huge financial losses, and these come from ocean pollution, from marine ecosystem degradation, and from coastal and marine exploitation. The UN's estimated the figure as high as $83 billion. So we have a situation where existing financing is still largely directed towards unsustainable sectors and activities. So it's critical that all sectors of the blue economy start to rapidly transition towards a more sustainable pathway. Banks have a major role to play in financing this transition, having the ability to mobilise funds and or finance towards the blue economy. Through our activities and our client relationships, financial institutions can have a major impact on ocean health, holding the power to accelerate and mainstream the transition. We could play an essential role in the wider ocean governance, engaging in public-private partnerships and starting to propel local to global actions, driving the change to more sustainable approaches. And we do see momentum building as more and more banks, insurers and investors are waking up to the realization that their financial activities are having a sizable impact on ocean health, and if they're not careful, they're creating negative feedback loops for some of these key ocean industries. So we, along with many of our clients, are recognising it's not only timely and complementary to the rest of our ESG efforts, it's absolutely necessary for us to act at this stage. So in practical terms, what do? Well, we can ensure that the investments and the creation of impacts are supporting more sustainable marine and coastal development. We can also start to raise awareness among business leaders and our clients, like biodiversity, concept of investor engagement is also one of the fastest growing responsible investment strategies. In the context of the blue economy, opportunities for investment engagement can include climate change mitigation or adaptation, marine renewable energy, plastic pollution prevention, and sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. Now, undoubtedly, stopping and then reversing the deterioration of the oceans will be costly, but it does provide growing investment opportunities. The approach to what Ralph was just talking about now with the win-win-win model, where literally everybody benefits. And not only that, because increasing numbers of private investors and institutional investors are keen to support companies who are already demonstrating good stewardship of the ocean and creating climate-friendly technology solutions, like entrepreneurs within the UBS Global Visionary Program, for example, some of whom are working on plant-based seafood alternatives. Not, so last year, our CEO challenged all of our employees to live up to our new purpose, connecting people for a better world. And so at UBS, and indeed across many other banks and financial institutions, using the power of our network and being a catalyst for our clients to do good is helping us to provide these investment opportunities on oceans, and helping our clients and our network to realise that oceans and the blue economy are increasingly important as an investment theme over the coming years. The reality is that the blue economy is not easily investable for large banks because a lot of the ventures are very early stage and quite high risk. Our financial institutions are often more comfortable investing in larger, more proven concepts. So how can we make a difference? Well, I won't speak for all the teams because UBS is a very large entity, but within my box here at the Philanthropy Services and the UBS Optimus Foundation team, we are active in supporting philanthropy services across over the last 20 years in a range of different sectors. And more recently, we've been looking at supporting ways of finding partners everywhere and supporting the next breakthrough solution, trying to encourage more private sector resources into this essential ocean conservation space. Working in ocean philanthropy, we're directing capital towards the development of nature-based solutions to protect and enhance marine ecosystems. We're trying to benefit future solutions by supporting resilience and providing the knowledge which will help vulnerable coastal communities and preserve the ocean ecosystems. We're trying to create and grow a better ecosystem for ocean finance, using philanthropic funds in more innovative ways to try to unlock large-scale private investors, because we acknowledge that philanthropy alone is never going to be enough to solve the problem, but it can be a key to unlocking these larger investments. So we look to identify early stage enterprises, things where we're gathering evidence and helping to build the foundation to support some of the science that Ralph was just speaking about, finding pilot programs or high risk initiatives which really need that open-minded, risk-friendly support, and looking to convene players and different partners who are interested to use the power of collaborative working and catalyze the systemic change that we need. We're really interested in coastal ecosystems, so we're looking for areas where the interplay between communities and the ocean is the strongest, and supporting initiatives that are delivering not only just for ocean conservation, but also for climate mitigation, for community benefits, and for biodiversity gains. Nature-based solutions delivering robust impact across the board. And this is why we're fascinated by mangrove conservation and restoration, along with seagrass, and again, some of the things that Ralph mentioned. A recent report that we co-funded from Earth Security, a group of environmental finance specialists, showed mangrove forests are a hugely underappreciated carbon asset. So they could alone unlock 380 million tonnes of carbon sequestration by 2040, while also delivering adaptation and resilience for vulnerable coastal communities who are facing floods, storms, and other growing climate impacts. The report estimated that approximately 11.1 billion of investment is needed over the next 20 years to tackle the full restorable potential of 700,000 hectares across 25 countries. But if this was delivered, it could lead to a potential return on investments of 11.8 billion over the same period, if the report's recommendations on carbon market pricing were followed. And the recent surge in 2020 and around COP26 of corporate and national pledges of carbon neutrality, we expect to increase the demand for and the prices of nature-based carbon sequestration, which will deliver new conduits of financing the natural assets of which we're discussing on a much greater scale. We've also found that many impact investors and philanthropists are interested in more than just donating money. They want to become advocates for the issues that they're passionate about. They want to understand the root cause of those issues and work together with like-minded individuals to create solutions to address them. So we're experimenting with things like what we call our Climate Collective, an impact partnership which pilots, replicates and scales climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. Currently, we're focusing on Southeast Asia because it's particularly well placed to make a global impact in climate mitigation and ocean conservation, leading the way on coastal wetlands, as well as forest protection and carbon sequestration. And due to the unique geography and range in living standards, it's especially vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So our collective brings together like-minded individuals and then focuses on coastal ecosystems and blue carbon, engaging with a portfolio of entities and investing in mangrove communities, supporting the development of coastal management systems and alternative incomes as well. In addition to these philanthropic and sustainable investments, we also regularly conduct research because we feel thought leadership in the field is a way that we can also support this transition. Our team work on providing insights to our clients with publications like our recent Sea Beyond the Blue that help people make fully formed ideas about how to take action in their investments and in their philanthropic work. We regularly convene webinars, in-person events and site visits to help clients and other partners understand the impacts of their investments at ground level. So the bottom line here is that we see ocean risk and climate risk are effectively the same as financial risk. And it's not a problem for next year or 10 years, it's a problem for today. So we need to help as much as we can and move from recognising the need for a change in investment to taking those steps to a new way of investing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Now we are going to say hi to Jan Bachner. Jan is the current Secretary General of One Ocean Foundation. Who is an Executive Master of Business Administration. He joined the Yacht Club Costa Esmeralda in 2007 as Secretary General. He played a key role in leading the international expansion of Yacht Club Costa Esmeralda into the Western Hemisphere with the opening of Yacht Club's second club in Virgin Gorda, British Virgin Island. And since 2018, he is the Secretary General of One Ocean Foundation, founded by the Yacht Club Costa Esmeralda to promote the blue economy and raise awareness about the emergency of marine pollution. Very welcome. He just came from Milan, so thank you very much. I give you the floor.
Should I take this one or this one?
No, this one. That's
yeah. Thank you, Patricia. I'm not sure. It's probably online. We need the microphone, right? Okay. I'm in. So thank you very much for the invite. We're very happy to be here. Invited by the Mary Foundation, and basically we in One Ocean Foundation we focus. One of our main focus areas is the blue economy. So we prepared a couple of slides to present you one of our main projects that we're focusing on, and I think we would like to present that today because I think it fits right into the topic on blue economy, which is the project is called ODI, Ocean Disclosure Initiative. While we wait for the presentation to get online, I'll give you a quick brief. The foundation is only 4 years old, but since the beginning already we have focused on the corporate world because we believe since there is no time left to change, I think everybody agrees on that. We think that the fastest change can actually come not really from policymakers, unfortunately, but from the corporate world, from the companies and from the financial institutions. So if there is financial interest, also from the companies, and the strong push that is coming on the topics on ESG for the companies, we believe that this is going to be the major factor and the major driver of change. Besides, obviously, the consciousness of the companies just to do the right thing. So in order to behave that way, we think the first starting point is you actually have to be aware of the impact you're having on the ocean environment. So that's where we started. We started off with our research already 3 years ago, together with partners, university partners like Staboconi University, McKinsey Worldwide, and CSIC, that is the Spanish institution to help us, number one, identify the different pressure points that the industry is having on the ocean ecosystems. And our interpretation on the blue economy is a bit different from what maybe you're used to read. It doesn't only focus on the economy that is specifically ocean related. We take a holistic approach where we say actually looking at all the different industries out there, almost all of them have an impact on the ocean environment, because as long as you use water, even if you're 250 or 300 kilometers far from the ocean, you will still have an impact. And basically we separated between a direct impact or indirect impact. So obviously most of the economies that are directly working with the ocean have direct impacts, whereas other industries, almost all of them, have indirect pressures that are sometimes even more important than the direct pressures. And we'll give you a couple of examples. The textile industry is heavily impacting the ocean environment, mostly on indirect pressures. If you take that, you soon realize that almost every industry has an impact on the ocean environment. And so, as a starting point, we thought the most important thing is actually talking to the industry and make them aware of their impact. So we did a whole study that was called Business for Ocean Sustainability, that started off in 2019, and which was presented to the United Nations in 2020. On a global perspective, we interviewed 1,650 international corporations throughout the world. We started off in the Mediterranean the year before, and then we went basically across the Atlantic, so it was pretty much on a global scale, in order to identify what is really the awareness of these companies and what, if they are aware on their impact. And on these findings, we did a mapping that I'll show you in a second once we manage to get the presentation hopefully uploaded. Basically, we identified 16 different industries. I think I'm going by memory now. 18 different pressure points, and we did a mapping where you see on the color scheme what are the different pressures by industry that are highly impacting the ocean. And the difficulty when you talk about the impact on the ocean is that you don't just find a simple formula like on CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, which is one formula that works for all the industries. When you go on ocean impact, you have to go really vertical by each industry, because what we saw is, number one, you're missing really today a standard of reporting for the companies. So if companies really want to drive down on SDG 14 and report on all the sustainability actions they do on SDG 14, there is no global standard. Okay, so we looked at all different frameworks that are out there, and we took as one of our main examples is the Carbon Disclosure Project, which we think is very complete. There is no area in these questionnaires that really deep dive on the impact on the ocean environment. And so we saw really that this was one of the missing pieces on these frameworks, which should help on one hand the corporations and the companies on trying to do better than the competition, right? So you'd want to see on the map how you're standing. Number two, it's highly important also for the financial industry, because that's going to that's where the decisions are made on the investments. We just heard also from UBS. The financial industry is highly, I think, looking at ocean investment opportunities. And I think this doesn't only apply to ocean-related industries. I think it goes above that. And since the pressure on ESG is on for all the different companies on their reporting systems, we think that one of the needs is really to standardize the reporting. So we decided as foundation to fill that gap, or try to fill that gap, and come up with with a framework that is purely dedicated to the ocean environment. That's why we call it Ocean ODI, Ocean Disclosure Initiative, and which has been presented in last September at the Milan Stock Exchange. Oh, here we are. Okay. this goes a bit back on what I said. There is no real framework, reporting framework that has the ocean as a topic. Maybe we want to go on that on the map that I explained before, that shows the different industries and the pressure points. These are just all the exactly. So this is just to give you an idea. Maybe I'm standing a bit in the middle. Here we go. So on this side you have all the different industries that we identified, and on the upper side you see the different pressures, right? So here maybe the color scheme doesn't really work, but I mean the dark red is obviously high pressure, and the not colored is the least pressure. And you'll realize basically that none of the industries has the same KPIs, right? So what we're missing really is the identification of each industry of key performance indexes, and that's specifically important for the reporting. So if we go back, we can I'll show you all the different frameworks that we've been that we went through. I think it was 26,000 data points that we analyzed. So it was quite a thorough analysis. This is just to give you some examples of the reporting standards that we went through, and we didn't really find much on the ocean specific. Okay, so we did a very thorough analysis because we wanted to come up with something that has real scientific background and is scientifically proven. So, as I said, we presented the framework in September in Milan at the stock exchange, and since then we have launched the first vertical industry, which is the fashion industry and the impact on the fashion industry in the ocean. We have invited 15 of the most important global brands to participate. We did this now all the way from January to February. We're going through interviews because what we want to have is, before we launch the framework officially, it should be validated by the companies itself. So we're looking at the different questions. We're going through with them face to face on all the different questions, and we think that probably the fashion industry should be done by the end of March, April. And we're ready to launch a second one, which is going to be agriculture food. After that, we think probably going into the marine industry. Fishing is a bit touchy because of transparency, which I think is one of the key words that we need when we talk about reporting. Unfortunately, transparency is still a huge issue when we talk about fishing, especially on an international scale. And so probably we'll focus on transportation, marine transportation. We try to focus mostly in these first industries, trying to apply the 80-20 rule on the industries that have the most impact on blue economy and on the ocean environment. So as I said before, basically this should serve both the companies and the financial communities, and the financial for their, basically when we talk about risk, for them it's more a risk analysis, basically on investing the funds in companies where they have less risks because of environmental issues. So we think we are ready. 2022 is going to be a key year because our focus is to have at least 5 industries ready by the end of the year. And so watch the space. We hope like this we can have a direct impact on trying to help the ocean environment on a very concrete way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, and congratulations for this great initiative in order to monitor different industries and their pressure of the oceans. We're going to finish, last but not least, with Natalie. Oh, yes, and sorry for the PPT issue. The computer wasn't reading the PDF. So last but not least, we're going to finish with Nathalie Hilmy, friends. She's doctor in economics. She's also the leader in environmental economics section of the Centre Scientifique de Monaco. She has developed several research in environmental economics with scientists from the CSM and also International Atomic Energy Agency. She's also an IPCC author. She studied the socioeconomics impacts of climate change and oceans acidification, and also the macroeconomics, economic policy, and sustainable development projects and topics. As an IPCC author, she has been in charge of several studies that you can find obviously in the web, and also she has publicated concerning blueprint for coral reef survival, ocean-related effect on climate change, and the role of blue stock conservation, among many others. So thank you very much for your welcome also, Natalie. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Patricia. I'm going to present today about the blue economy and ocean sustainability. The ocean, next slide, please. Yeah, the ocean is very important from an economic point of view because it's a primary source of protein for 2.6 billion people and represent 15% of GDP in 2,000 countries. If we calculate the GDP, the ocean will be on the 7th in the world, so it's really important. Next slide, please. Also, the ocean seems an infinite resource. The reality is profoundly different. Growing scientific evidence shows that the health of the oceans is at great risk and that marine ecosystems are already subject to extreme stress from pollution and overexploitation. The demand for ocean resources is expected to continue growing, furthering expectations for oceans as drivers of human development and the source of food, materials, and space. Reversing the ocean's further degradation and preserving their health is essential due to the many irreplaceable benefits that they provide. As a result, their conservation and sustainable use are crucial for planetary health and human well-being. Next slide, please. I'm going to present what we have done in a workshop that has been held maybe two or 3 years ago during Monaco Ocean Week 2 here in Monaco. And it was about ocean sustainability and ocean economics in developing countries. Next slide, please. The oceans cover more than 70% of the Earth's surface and store as much as 97% of all water on the planet. They provide a variety of good and ecosystem services to human beings. They are not only a major source of food, they also produce oxygen, absorb carbon dioxide, play a main role in climate regulation, and provide energy as well as recreational services. The oceans and their resources, next slide please. The oceans and their resources have made development possible in all countries throughout the world, and they continue to contribute greatly to poverty alleviation and food security in the coastal and inland communities of the world's developing nations. Next slide, please. Also, natural capital is the most fundamental form of capital. It is not accounted for in national wealth accounting systems yet. There is an urgent need to significantly improve our collective understanding and modeling of the complex interconnections between ecosystems and sustainable human well-being to enable better management decisions and policy. International agreements are not being taken seriously in underdeveloped or developing countries due to the difficulty of achieving basic needs, the often high level of corruption, the general lack of oversight and enforcement of marine environmental law.
Next slide, please. So now I'm going through the different economic sectors of the blue economy. We have first the fisheries and the aquaculture. Global marine capture fisheries support 3 billion people with food and vital macronutrients in the world. The health of the ocean and marine resources are therefore crucial to ensure the sustainability of fisheries, enhance the food and nutritional security of humans in the future. Next slide, please. Tourism is an important economic activity, but this sector also generates CO2 emissions and environmental degradation. So tourism destroys the environment, which makes the location attractive. Next slide. developing countries continue to account for most of the world's maritime trade flows, both in terms of export and imports. About 80% of trade is done by maritime transportation. Next slide. So deep sea mining. There are three driving positions on the matter of deep sea mining. First, developed states foresees a future driven by a high demand for strategic elements such as copper and cobalt, as well as for new technologies based on miniaturization of electronic components. The second position concerns the change in control of the world mining industry, opportunity for new business and startup companies. The argument is made that there will be more interdependence from geopolitical and economical constraints since the ores are located in the high sea, areas beyond national jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Now about the energy from the ocean, we can speak about oil and gas extraction because it is done also in the sea, but this is not sustainable. So the next slide will be more sustainable about other renewable energies. The development of ocean-based renewable sources of energy, thermal and mechanical energy, has been explored in the last decades, but it has slowed down in recent years, especially in the developed world. Developing countries have taken the lead in recent years in investment in renewables. Next slide, please. Food, water, energy, and raw material are all critical resources to human well-being. The challenges of meeting future human needs for each resource are rendered more complex by their interconnectivity. Human needs to reduce the CO2 footprints generated urgently. We propose that industrial production of marine microalgae, for example, can provide a foundation for stabilizing Earth's climate system while simultaneously addressing the global challenges of food, energy, and water security. Then we can wonder something. Next slide, please. Is it still possible to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius objective by 2050? Next slide, please. The good news is that the 1.5 degree pathway is technically achievable. Such a pathway could require dramatic emission reductions over the next 10 years, starting now. There is a series of prominent shifts encompassing food and forestry, large-scale electrification, industrial adaptation, clean power generation, and carbon management and markets that will need to happen for the world to move rapidly into 1.5 degree pathways. Next slide, please. Maybe I can go into finance. How can finance help to achieve this objective? We have what we call sustainable finance. The transition to a low-carbon and climate-resilient economy will require innovation, commitment, and significant investment. Regulation and consumer behaviors, investor pressures, and technological innovations are emerging as a strong driver of this change. Next slide, please. Carbon emissions are hardest to abate in sectors like transport, power generation, steel, and cement. But these industries are still vital to economic growth in a net zero economy. Companies that are leaders in the race to decarbonize will increase their market share and grow revenues. Adapting to a warmer planet also creates opportunities for companies that build resilience. Physical manifestations of warming planet, such as wildfire, drought, and flooding, will continue to accelerate even in a best-case scenario. Companies that increase our resilience to climate change by strengthening infrastructure, monitoring risk, or spreading their burden of the risk should benefit from significant growth opportunities. This will ultimately benefit investors. Thank you. Next slide. To operate this redirection of 2.5% of world savings toward low carbon investment, both public and private investment will be needed. The redirection of private investment is between 5.6 and 8.3% of yearly private capital revenues, value of capital plus interest revenue. De-risking this low carbon investment is key to increase their volume and facilitate the greater involvement of financial actors, institutional investors, bond markets, etc. Two key parameters are the access to capital markets at low interest rates and the emergence of new low carbon asset classes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. I just wanted to ask one question to all the panelists. You're all both in different sectors. One of you is working for a private bank, a very important one. The other one, even if Ralph is a sabbatic year of the IMF, you have a very long experience in the IMF. Jan worked for a foundation, and Nathalie is an academic and she's working here in the Centre Scientifique de Monaco. So my question is, what is your feeling about how things are moving? Are we far or not from achieving your goal? We know that we have improved our theoretical side, that obviously you are improving, you have 3 industries, Jan, in what do you want to achieve, and we today have more data about what do we need to avoid the climate change, Nathalie, but the thing is, how far are we to really find concrete solutions in order to need what we need to do?
Okay, the last IPCC report, is it working? Yeah. The last IPCC report was really clear. We have to do something, and each decision is important. Because if we want to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius, as a Paris Agreement said, we have to act really rapidly, but we have to act all together. It's a coordinated action. The private sector, meaning the companies and the investors, but also the government and you, me, the civil society, everybody, we have to change our way and transform the whole economy.
Difficult question. Now, based on what we're focusing on, and since we're working with the environment, I think we have to be optimistic. Otherwise, what we're doing doesn't really make sense. So I think we have to be optimistic that we can make it and we will make it. Unfortunately, I think on a global perspective, we're getting sidetracked quite a lot on other emergencies like COVID, like wars, and instead of concentrating on the real things that matter for our future and for the future of our next generations. So I think if it takes a global effort to really concentrate on these things, which I think are fundamental, and nobody really discusses it. I mean, it's you know, everybody talks about it, but I think this is the future. And nobody really cares when you talk about the future on wars or, you know, or other areas. So I think if we would take it really serious and focus on the investments and not just talk about it, but focus on these investments, we could, for example, our little mini brick on that we try to contribute. If we would have more, resources available right now, I would like to push the button and get all the industries done still in 2022, right? Because we think this is needed on a global scale. it would be great to see this collaboration all working together, foundations working together, everybody trying to, because at the end of the day, we have all the same aim, right? So competition doesn't really make sense. So yes, I'm positive. Are we on the right track? No. Are things moving? Yes. Way too slow. That's my personal perspective. And the more you get involved with the scientific community, I think, the tougher it gets.
And that's very interesting what you mentioned, because obviously the world is facing other major things, but usually people believe that climate change is an ecological thing only, and it's not. It's also an economical one, social one, cultural one, and so on. So what about the private sector and the finance, Hannah? We all know that each time we have a natural catastrophe, everyone's talk about climate change and the things that we have to do for that and how to invest on that sector, but it's not something that people are thinking, at least I believe from the finance sector, all the time. It's not a permanent worry. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think I'm also of the opinion that we need to stay optimistic, because I think, working in this field, you can't really afford not to. So you have to keep your eye on the prize, as it were. I think we are still moving too slowly. Yes, I think everybody, again, knows that. And the most recent IPCC report, as you pointed out, shows us that this is not, it's already here, right? There's like 3.6 billion people who are already being impacted by climate change. This isn't something that's going to happen. But one thing that I do think is changing is the speed at which people are starting to understand this and react to it. And an example might be, if you look at the TCFD, for example, how long it took them from generating the idea to getting to a point where they're implementing. And then you take TNFD, which is obviously, much, much newer and still very much baby steps, but the speed at which they've gone from generation of idea to presenting their framework is rapidly sped up, rapidly catalyzed compared to the other. And I'm also noticing across the sector this huge interest in particularly nature, biodiversity, and how it relates to climate change, and a massive interest in people coming in and saying, where can I invest? How can I invest? They want to do things. So I'm not saying necessarily that we've solved it by any means, but I think that things are speeding up, and the message is definitely starting to get through. Whether it's fast enough, that's a different question.
Thank you, Anna. And Ralph, I don't want to put pressure on you, but you're working for the IMF, and obviously this is a major concern how the international organizations have reacted, and they are going to react about this. What can you say about that? What have you seen?
I cannot speak for my organization, but I know that the IMF is very much engaged on the climate issue. In particular on the mitigation, adaptation, and the pricing of carbon. But your question is more broad than this. Look, let me be more blunt than my colleagues. Nature is not waiting for us to get our act together. We may decide to get distracted, but we get distracted at our own peril. Nature climate risk is coming at us at a very high speed. It was supposed to be 2050 if we had done our homework quite some time ago. We didn't. So it became 2040, and we still aren't. So now it's 2030. And if we don't, it's here. People always think in linear terms, whereas when you're talking about what we are worried about is uncertainty, meaning you're not going to be able to even put probabilities on it. And that, forget the politicians, because politicians follow, it's the tail that wags the dog. They follow the money. Everybody's following the money. So I would bet my money that it's going to be the insurance companies and the financial sector that is starting to feel it. I'll give you an example. I just got my insurance policy yesterday. Okay? I haven't had any accidents. I haven't had or anything of the sort. My premium went up. So I just out of curiosity, I called them up. I said, can you explain to me why my premium went up? I've had no accidents. I have 3 cars, no accidents, none of the issues. Why did you raise my premium? They said, well, we've had losses. And I said, related to what? They said, the climate. So we have to spread it. So they're already feeling it. The markets are feeling it. Now the question is, you feel it, you try to price it, but the price is not enough to change people's behavior. That's what I was trying to tell you in this presentation. The price is not enough. Okay, so there's a mitigation part, there's a risk reduction aspect to this, but there's another part of this, which is a revenue generating nature. That's what I'm talking about. Carbon is related to climate, but nature markets, nature-based solutions is beyond just carbon and biodiversity. It's much more than that. It's a vision of tomorrow, of how we want to live as good citizens of this earth, because the old model is defunct, bankrupt. We all know it can't be, spit and paste. You really have to change people's behavior, companies' behavior. Now, I agree with my colleagues. Hannah's already saying it. We are at a point in time where everybody is engaged on this issue. Maybe at different speeds, but everybody's engaged. My son tells me he will never work for a company that is engaged in extraction. Okay? That's the youth, if you like. Investors are saying, I don't want just ESGs. I want to know what you're really doing to minimize your footprint on this, or to walk softly on this earth. I mean, is that the companies are engaged. The politicians, they smell where the winds are going and then they follow. This is how it's going to happen. So it is happening. I do agree with Hannah and my colleagues. It's not happening at the speed that it ought to. We need to pick it up. From the policy side, what you really need is the political will. What I was trying to show you is science tells us how important nature is to us. We can even value it. But the markets aren't going to fix it unless we fix the legal framing of this. Once you do that, then the markets say, okay, it's a new class of assets. Fantastic. Guess what? Except that this asset does not deplete. It's not oil out of the ground. It's actually keeping things where they are and making money and having better nature and having better outcomes for everybody.
Thank you.
So I have to be like Hannah and others. I have to be optimistic. We don't have the luxury of thinking that this is a matter of opinion. It's not. It's a reality that we are dealing with.
Thank you, Ralph. We have a last question.
No, I'd like just to throw something out, especially also to Ralph, because we've been talking about pricing. And I think sometimes when just in our daily lives, I mean, since we need to change, right? Everybody agrees on it. I think we have to change rapidly. And it's going to these changes are going to hit all our individual daily lives if we really want to change. So, because you have to change habits, right? Because everybody agrees you can't keep going the way we're doing. Now, talking about pricing, just a question that comes up when you talk about nature, talking about the normal price, what the price should usually be made up of, is also the cost, I think, increasingly the cost to nature, right? The cost to nature, to the environment. And so when you talk about driving around in your car with petrol prices that are now, everybody's complaining about the increase, but you actually take the cost on nature, which is not included in that price. So I think this should be actually a change of complete paradigm, because nobody talks about it, right? And I think that's what we really should, it's going to cause a change, because then it's not going to be $2 anymore by liter, it's going to increase dramatically. So this obviously would have huge dramatic impacts, but I think that's, if we really want to look at this, I think we have to take the cost of nature in perspective. I don't know if Ralph agrees on that.
No, absolutely. Reflecting the true value of nature in the pricing is very important. I mean, I engage with people that work, for example, on plastics, and they're always asking me, how do you solve this issue? Because in the US, by the way, I don't know how it is in Europe, but we've certainly have lost the battle on recycling. If you look at the data, it's scary. Nothing is being recycled. It's this much. And people say nobody wants to recycle. I said exactly as you're saying, which is because the cost to nature is not being imputed into the price. You're getting away with it. Basically, you're privatizing the gain and socializing the cost, and it gets diffused. And then you say, I don't have to worry about it. So the issue is how to value a living nature. That's what my work is all about. And how to take it to the markets. And I figure once we do that, for example, we can sell the services of mangroves, as Hannah was saying, I believe. There are experiments now all over the place where you're actually not sell the mangroves, you never sell the asset. The carbon services, well, the world needs to go carbon zero. You sell the services of the mangroves. Suddenly the mangroves have a value. They never had a value. Now let me actually be even more provocative than this.
We have one
Once
minute,
you value,
they're going to kill me.
sorry.
We are 1 minute, otherwise the public is going to
Sorry.
kill me.
Then I'll stop. I'll leave my provocative answer to another time then.
No, please, Ralph, please.
No, I just want to tell you something that's really cool that I think people may be interested in, especially maybe colleagues from the private sector. When we used to have polluters in the past, and when we wanted to assess a penalty for the pollution, let's say it's an oil spill, I looked into it myself. It was about, well, how many oil barrels were spilled and what's the cost of the cleanup? Notice, whether that spill destroyed mangrove, seagrass, salt marshes, kelp forests, they were invisible. Now what you can do, once you do the market valuation and you're selling the carbon of these assets, you know exactly what the penalty is going to be for anybody that pollutes and destroys these bodies. Because you are depriving the communities of the future income that they would have gotten from the earnings from the sale of this carbon. So that creates, again, with the legal aspect, the financial. We are really not using markets. The point here, we should be using markets in a smart way. You need the legal, don't, but the markets are the ones to reinforce it. For the IMF, I worked on Basel Accord for 23 years. Okay, and the Basel Accord was about telling banks how much capital they ought to hold. And it was a minimum of 8%. I know of no bank that held minimum of 8%. Everybody held much more than 8%. Not to please the regulator, is because the markets were telling them, the regulator is asking for 8, but I want to see a lot more from you to give you a AAA rating. You see, you get the legal side and you get the market side. Together, they work together to change the behavior of the agent in the middle. In this case, it was the banks. What I'm trying to tell you is we need governments, if they truly care about nature, they truly care about the oceans, is to put their money where their mouth is and to say, if you pollute in my water, there's a penalty. If governments were to do that, I'm willing to bet with anybody, the markets will then realize, wait a minute. If I'm an insurance company and I used to insure a ship, I'll say, wait a minute. When I insured you, I didn't know there was such a thing called a whale that has a value of 3 million, or a mangrove or a seagrass. Now you come back, I'm going to reprice your contract.
Ralph?
Hannah knows this more than anyone else. They will reprice all of these things. And this is how the markets work with the legal side to change the behavior.
Thank you
and
very
I fully
much,
agree with your
Ralph.
point. We need to change the behavior.
I need to close, unfortunately, because we have another panel, but I'm sure that we are going to share a panel also with Jan, Hannah, and Natalie, because we all work together in those projects. So thank you very much, all of you, to participate here in this panel, and I hope to see you very soon. So do not kill me, but we need to make some spaces for the new participants, please.
Gracias por invitarnos.
Sí, claro.
Súper bueno.
Vamos, vamos. Que me sirve con las ruedas.
Voy corriendo, tengo que llevar el baño a la piscina.
Sonia, it's okay. Just like that, yes.
So, so thank you very much and welcome to the second panel. In this panel, we are talking about how to support teachers for climate change education. We are going to have several expositors. The first one is David Wilgenbus. I hope you pronounce like that, your name, family name. So David is a astrophysicist by training. He has coordinated several large-scale educational programs on sustainable development and science, which have been implemented in more than 100,000 classes in France and abroad. His expertise lies in science teaching and education for sustainable development, in particular the design of pedagogical projects and teacher training. Since 2018, he is the Chief Executive Officer of the Office for Climate Education. He leads the operational team based in Paris, and he is responsible for the implementation of the OCES strategic plan. He also contributes to pedagogical engineering and teach training at the OCEA. Welcome, David. I give you the floor.
Yep. This one. I've got a presentation. If we could, display it. So while we are waiting for the presentation, I'd like to thank the Mary Foundation to give us the opportunity to be there and exchange with all of you on these educational aspects. Thank you. So the topic of my presentation will be what is needed to promote and enhance climate change education, and especially what could we do for supporting teachers. Next slide, please. I will not give some details about that, but just for you to know, if you need some references on what I will present just after, here are some articles that from which I have extracted some data and highlights. So next slide, please. Yeah. Next one. So where we are. Whoa. There is something strange here. Maybe anyway, doesn't matter. So I would like to put the stress on quite a strange situation, meaning that when you look inside at what happened in the schools in terms of climate change education, there is not so much things that are done on the field, despite the fact that when you look at the international and institutional context, actually the context is quite favorable for this, especially since the Paris Agreement, especially its Article 12. The idea of the Article 12 of the Paris Agreement is that the implementation of the Paris Agreement will be very costly in terms of economics, but also change of behaviors and so on, and at least in democratic countries, to support this very strong transition, it will need the comprehension and the agreement of the population. So the education is really central in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Few other contexts, like the IAP. The IAP is the World Federation of the Academies of Science. Put the stress on the key role of the teachers in the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and also a stress on how far the scientific community should act to support the educators, because these are two different worlds, and researchers can play a very important role in supporting education, especially in the climate change. And here with this problem of display, I don't know why, but you all know that the UN Sustainable Development Goal put quite a large stress on, of course, sustainable development, but also sustainable development education, actually. Next slide, please. So when you look also in the field, actually, we can remark that from the youth itself, there is a very there is a very strong demand from the youth who really struggle to receive this education, because so far in their classes actually there is nothing but really not enough about climate change. So the institutional context is there, the demand from the youth is there, but actually in the field, yeah, a lot has to be done. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in this context, please, yeah, in this context, institutional, like ministries of education, but also scientific community, NGO, active in the field of sustainable development education or science education, decided a few years ago to create an office called the Office for Climate Education, devoted to coordinate an international effort to promote climate change education, especially at the school level, primary and secondary school level. And the Office for Climate Education has been created also as a center under the auspices of UNESCO. And last year we became also an observing member of the IPCC. So we are in charge of supporting the different IPCC reports by pedagogical tools and projects in this field. Next slide, please. So as I said before, despite this very favorable context, when we look at what happened on the field, it's a bit disappointing. The first aspect is that from the UNESCO survey that has been done last year, we realized that, of course, a lot of countries have implemented what we call ACE, Action for Climate Empowerment. But when we look at the detail, very few actions really concern education. Most of the actions concern public awareness, which is actually important, but education is a bit weak in this field. And when we look also at what happened in the classes, we can realize that actually a very small amount of classes study climate change. So this study has been done over a few thousand of schools, and not random schools, eco schools. So actually the network in the world where the schools are the more active in terms of sustainable development education. And when you look at what topic do they teach in their classes in these eco schools, actually climate change is only in 2% of the lessons in ESD. So there is quite a gap that we have to understand. And the question is why? Why is it so difficult for teachers to implement climate education? Next slide, please. Actually, there are tons of reasons. But if I try to summarize very shortly, we could say that the most important reason is a systemic reason. Despite the institutional involvement in the Paris Agreement and so on, very few school curricula really integrate climate change as a topic. Actually, so a survey has been done last year among approximately 200 of school curricula by UNESCO, and actually only 2% of the school curricula in the world are considered to integrate at a moderate level climate change as a topic. And for the rest, let's say 98%, it's low or very, very minimal or not at all present. And actually in half of the curricula of the schools of the word climate is, even one word, this word is not present in half of the curricula of the world. So actually this is really an issue because as we know, climate change is a very complex, the Earth system is a complex system, climate is a complex system, the ocean is also a climate system, and we know that it has been discussed before that there are a lot of connection between ocean issues and climate issues. So it takes time, it deals with large scales in terms of space and time, etc. So it's not so easy to teach. There's a lot of complexity, feedbacks and so on. So, of course, as it's difficult, teachers need appropriate resources, but also training and time to set up this kind of teaching. And as soon as it's not in the curricula, there is no training, no resources, and no time devoted to this teaching. Another difficulty in terms of, let's say, didactics is that climate education is not only about understanding climate change, but also about understanding the impacts of our behavior and possibly changing our behavior and acting, actually. So to do so, it's not only about hearing your teacher speaking about climate change, but also it deals with acting and being active. So we have to implement active pedagogy, like, for example, project-based approach. And a lot of teachers are also not very familiar with this approach of teaching. So there are some complexity because of the topic itself and also because of the pedagogical approach they are supposed to promote in this teaching. And an additional difficulty for the teachers is that climate change is also something that is difficult to teach in terms of emotion. A lot of students today feel really anxious because of climate change and other issues, and a lot of teachers are so uncomfortable with this aspect that they prefer not to talk about climate change. Next slide, please. So, as a consequence, what we can see here is that among the planet, basically, all of the teachers consider that it is very important to teach climate change, and we should teach climate change, but actually, less than 30% feel really comfortable in teaching it and also in explaining the very basics knowledge about climate change and the concrete impacts of climate change in their own area. Not speaking about the global issues and so on. So there is really a gap between the importance of the topic and the preparedness of the teachers. And for students, as we can see here, basically this study has been done in France, but actually we see in the literature that it's almost the same in all developed countries. A large majority of the teenagers, let's say, expect a catastrophic future, and so they're really afraid of these climate issues. So this is really important that we do something. So could we move on, please, to the next slide? So actually, what could we do? Next one, please. And so I will give you highlights taken from a variety of experiments that have been implemented in various regions of the world by different organizations, and the OCE, but also other organizations. And actually, all these experiments converge to the same conclusions. So in terms of what should we need, the very first thing that we have to do is to work with educators and education systems to implement climate change into the curricula. So this is very important that we have an holistic approach, multidisciplinary approach, and that we support public policy, not only teachers, but also policymakers. The second aspect is that really teachers are at the core of this problem, and we need to equip the teachers with appropriate knowledge, tools, resources, training, and daily support in their classes, because the topic is new for them, they are not prepared to teach it, they are not comfortable to teach it, so we have to accompany them. And actually the OCE, but a lot of actors, but especially the OCE, produce quite a lot of education materials and professional development tools. So here I brought just one teaching guide called The Climate in Our Hands, Ocean and Crossover. So I will give it to you and for you to have a look. Actually, it shows examples of how we could mix ocean literacy and climate education in terms and what kind of turnkey pedagogical protocols we could propose to teachers to facilitate their work in the class. Another aspect is really, which is very important, is to rebuild the trust with the scientific community, especially on this climate change issue. There is so many misconceptions, disinformation sometimes, that it's really important to rely on a stable and commonly shared knowledge. And this is why we consider that it's very important for us as educators to build on IPCC reports for education programs. Actually, this is the role of the OCE as an IPCC observing member to support the IPCC report by appropriate toolkits. So, for example, summary for teachers of the IPCC report, but also pedagogical guide and so on. Next slide, please. And thank you. And the very last advice or highlights that we could provide for what can we do to improve climate change education. Actually, as I said before, teachers are at the very center of this aspect. They are very central here, and we have to support them. But it's not only about teachers. Climate education should also involve the school as a whole, as an ecosystem. It's, of course, teachers, but also administrative staff, but also the parents, the community around the school. So we have to propose a whole school approach. And this is very important for us to work with communities, not only with teachers. And what we have to provide to students is not only knowledge and understanding about climate change or ocean literacy and whatsoever. It's really to help them to become an agent of change and to provide some agency, to overcome this feeling of being powerless, to overcome this eco-anxiety which is rising. So we have to promote active pedagogy and to help them to implement projects in their class. Not only teaching and learning, but also acting. It could be adaptation project, it could be mitigation project, it could be public awareness project, but they have to do something, even if it is very modest. It puts them in a position which is very positive and encourage them to do more. So I think I will stop there. Next slide. I'm pretty sure this is the, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. And,
thank you very much. Congratulations for this amazing work. Now I'm going to give the floor to Tim Spock, who is Director of Education and Public Engagement in the Associated University, Inc. So Tim has been a leader in STEM education for more than 25 years. He currently serves as a Director, as I said, of Education and Public Engagement at AUI, where he managed the development and implementation of innovative STEM education efforts and facilitated the growth of domestic and international STEM-related network. As an educator, he regularly engaged his students in authentic research projects, including topics in astronomy and climate science. Among other recognitions, Tim is the recipient of the Albert Einstein. He holds a doctorate in curriculum and instruction from West Virginia University and a master's degree in science education from Claremont University of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much, Tim. Welcome.
Thank you, Patricia. And I'm going to try not to yell into the microphone because I know I'm going to automatically go into my teacher voice. It's, once you've been there for 20 years, it's kind of hard to give that up. But David did an excellent job of kind of laying the groundwork as far as what are some of the issues that we're facing in climate change education, and what are some of the reasons for that. And I'll try to build on that presentation a bit because there were a lot of great points that were made. So thank you for that. AUI stands for Associated Universities Incorporated. We don't have anything to do with universities. We're actually a nonprofit in the United States, but we specialize in the management of large science facilities for the U.S. federal government, as well as we're doing some work in Chile, and hopefully have some good news coming up here in the not too distant future there. But let's go to the next slide here. My role as Director of Education and Public Engagement, what I do is really to try and build, invent STEM education efforts that are innovative, and then implement them with a variety of partners. And so we do work with a lot of people. And so if there's something in here that's of interest to you, we would love to partner with you and explore those opportunities further. But I think building on what David said, whose job is it to educate? Whose job is it to address the issues around climate science education? Okay, that's a question for you. So I don't know, whose job is it? You have all these bins up here. We have the art teacher, we have life science teachers, we have the physical science teachers, the math teacher. Whose job is it? You can yell if you want. I like participatory presentation. Everyone, okay? So, next. Whoever got that wins the prize. All right, it's everybody's job. That's great. It's also the big problem. It's everybody's job. And anytime it's everybody's job, nobody does it. Because it's somebody else's job or somebody else is doing that. The other issue is just this diagram up here that we have, which is simply that we're in silos. The math teacher does their thing, the physical science teacher does theirs, the art teacher does theirs, and we just go ahead and still have this old model of an assembly line that we're going to put this widget on the kid here, and then we're going to put this thing on them over here, and eventually they're going to graduate with all these pieces. The problem is the pieces are all disconnected. And so the other challenge here, and David alluded to it, is that we don't give teachers the right tools. And I'm going to tell you one of the biggest tools is time. So we don't give them the time to go ahead and actually work together to actually integrate their curriculum. Even schools that think it's a great idea and try it, it's like, well, teachers need more prep time. Well, no, we can't do that. Can't give them more time off. And by the way, prep time for a teacher is not time off. It's actually working. So that is a challenge. It's a systemic issue, as David had mentioned, and it's an issue that needs to be resolved at the very fundamental level. Okay, so next slide. This is why I like the Mary folks, all right? The Mary Foundation is because they have solved this problem for us. They have a multidimensional approach to the environmental education or to teaching and learning that can not just be applied to environmental science, but can be applied everywhere. And the whole idea is that there's the environmental impact, there's the societal impact, there's the cultural impact, and what we often forget is there is the economic impact. And so instead of just teaching something or trying to address an issue from the science perspective, if that's the only lens we use, then what we're going to do is create a solution that has bad effects on the society, on culture, and on the economics. And so if we don't get the math teacher working with the science teacher to help students understand that it's not, the science is there, and we have this knowledge, but what we do with that knowledge, that's where policy making comes in, and it's critical for kids to be thinking as policymakers, not just as scientists, because ultimately all of these pieces are impacted by the decisions we make, and kids start from very young building habit of mind. And so it's not that we need to put this piece on and this piece on, it's that we need to let them struggle with the issues. And yes, as David said, it's tough on a kid to say, look, hey, in 50 years, your home's going to be underwater. Sorry. But that is an issue where we need to find delicate ways of addressing it. Otherwise, what we're doing is putting the blinders on the children who are sitting in the back seat as the parents drive the car over the cliff. That's a bad analogy. That's not a very good one. But it is the reality of what we are doing in many cases when it comes to climate science education. Next slide. So I am going to... Okay, so here we go. And this also gets into something else here. We need to tell kids the truth, okay? We want to build trust within the scientific community. They need to understand up front. So for example, technology in education and technology in general, it's good and it's bad. There are positives and there are negatives, and we have to understand that. And that gets back to that multidimensional approach that Mary Foundation has been using. So for example, our computers, my cell phone that's right here, all of that requires mineral extraction. And this right here is where it's coming from. It requires this right here. So if we want the technology, if we want the advancements, but we don't want to be releasing CO2 and other things, then what we need to do is we need to work. The problem is not to end this altogether, but to actually green this up and to say, how do we do this and reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are needed, reduce the CO2 that's emitted, reduce the amount of water that's being used, reduce the impact on the ecosystem. This is one major project at AUI that we're trying to work on, is how do we green up the mineral extraction process early on, so upstream, so that in this point here, we're actually reducing the impact on the environment. And we are looking for partners on that. So if you're interested in something like that, I'd love to talk to you some more. Students need opportunities to struggle with these problems because, again, it goes back to habit of mind. You need to generate solutions. And so giving kids these scenarios or giving them these projects and not just giving them information is something that's critical. Next slide. And you might think I'm going to be bouncing around here a bit, and wow, okay, David, it's happened to me too. So we're partners here. Okay. So, technology, one of the advantages is that it allows us to communicate and collaborate. That's something that's critically important. When I was a teacher, I went to a conference, an international conference. I met an individual, an educator from Trieste, Italy, and we started talking about, well, hey, let's have the kids in Oil City, Pennsylvania, in the United States work with your kids, and let's come up with a joint project. We centered it around climate change, and even, this wasn't a major, we weren't solving a major issue, but we addressed collaboratively over, 7,000 kilometers, 5 to 6 time zones. And by the way, we discovered the 5 to 6 time zones when there was a time change and we weren't on at the same time, as many of you have, I'm sure, over the past 2 years with all of your Zoom meetings. So we did this, and what they came up with was this T-shirt, and just so you know it's real, right there it is. We can pass it around, and you can take a look at it. But this is what they invented, and I think it was really cute. We have these penguins here who are saying, we'll work for ICE. We want change, and the vulnerable, which is, very often the individuals who are most impoverished. These are the individuals that are most impacted by climate change, and so we want to change. That's a little subtlety there. Be wise, don't make the sea level rise, stop climate change. So this was the T-shirt that we collaborated on, and there was one in, I don't have the one in Italian, sorry, but we have the English version here. So this again is one example of where we're using technology to facilitate collaboration and cooperation, which, by the way, if we're going to ever solve climate change, is the fundamental component. This is not about just solving it in your local community and thinking about, well, how does this impact me? That might be a little part of it, but if we don't get kids thinking about how does it impact you over there, how does it impact the globe, because we will not address this in one country alone. This has to be addressed as a global effort and initiative. And again, going back to those habits of minds that we need to instill in kids, this is something that we need to do. Next slide. Okay, so, we're missing another one here, but that's all right. You'll get the idea. So technology allows us to access and manipulate and analyze data. And this is something that is very powerful. If we're going to understand how the globe is being impacted by our actions, by other actions, it's all about data collection. Well, if we see these growing, whether it's the National Snow and Ice Data Center, there are all of these data resources that are out there. One of the problems is, and again, I think David pointed to this, is that we have some of these things that are here, but the tools and the techniques for kids and for students and teachers to be able to utilize, they're not really there. So for example, these databases, they think about it from the science lens individually. Now, if only there was somebody on the Mary Foundation with them, they would think about it from the social perspective, the cultural perspective, and the economic perspective, and they would start from the beginning and think, well, how do we really simplify this to make it so teachers can use it as a tool? And by doing that, what they would probably find is they would make it a lot more accessible for the professional scientific community as well. So there are habits of minds that we need to change if we're going to address these issues. But this is another way technology can help us. Next slide. But one of the issues is that in thinking about this and thinking about technology, we often leave out people. We leave out people who aren't like us. We think about it from our perspective. So if 90% of the world doesn't have a hearing impairment, well, you know, the people with hearing impairments, they, you know, do without. Visually, the same sort of thing. Or if somebody doesn't speak English like me, well, you know, most of the world, scientific language is English, so it's, you know, that's what we have to do. So there are these accessibility issues that we need to address, and we can use technology to address those issues. And one of the things about people who struggle, though, individuals in particular with disabilities, they have already, because of their lives, have had to create this habit of mind of problem solving. Of, okay, I'm faced with this situation. What do I need to do? How am I going to solve this so that I can get from point A to point B? These are so these individuals already have the habits of mind that are going to help us solve really difficult problems. But they're pushed out because they don't have the tools and resources. Next slide. So I'm going to go to astronomy. You might think, oh, I thought this was climate science, not astronomy. But, you know, that's the other problem. We're in silos. Things that we do in astronomy can really help us solve other problems too. So for example, images. You look at this visually, okay, great. But what if you didn't have eyes? How could you explore this? So AUI and its partners with NSF, U.S. National Science Foundation funding, we built a tool that allows a blind individual to explore this image. They can go ahead and navigate it. They can say, oh, there's something bright in the upper left-hand corner. Let me zoom in there without sight, all through sound. And you can tell, is there a satellite moving through the image? Okay. And I won't show it here because I'm not going to deviate to technology because it often fails during a presentation. But if you do want to take a look at this, it is free. You can access it at idataproject.org. Please talk to me, and I'm happy to go ahead and do a demo for you if that's something that you want. But what we're doing now is we're thinking about, okay, we've done this for astronomical images. Now we know we have satellite images, geoscience data. And so we're looking at, well, how do we take this tool and actually apply it so that those data sets, the snow, ice data, can actually be accessed through sound, and that gives us the ability to then teach some of these concepts to individuals who are blind. Next slide. Okay, going back to astronomy again, and this started me thinking about ideas of, okay, so I didn't, you know, when we first started this project, and I'm PI on it, the IDATA project was something that was, you know, very different for me. This idea of how do we take something visual that I think is visually and turn it into something that's not. Well, so again, thinking about astronomy, let's think about monitoring the health of the planet. And I'm going to present something here, and we're going to bridge it to actually using sound again to actually help us solve a problem. So here we know, how do we know that what stars galaxies are made of? I mean, we don't go out and get samples of them. We can't travel to the star or galaxy and go collect a sample. How do we know that? The only thing we get from stars is what? Light, that's it. So that's all we have to work with. Well, we found out that if we break the light off into its parts, we actually get spectrum. And there's gases that have certain emissions, and they have a certain pattern, just like a fingerprint. So this is the observed spectrum. Tell me which of these three gases are present there. What do you think? Okay, helium? Well, it's not very bright, but boron doesn't have the one red line over there, so it's not, but hydrogen and helium are in there. So next slide. So we can turn this into a line spectrum, and instead of it being in color, we have intensity, okay, versus wavelength or color. Next. And so basically there are those lines, and right here, this is the hydrogen spectrum, and we can see there's a line, there's a line, there's a line, there's a line, there's a line. That's a pattern for hydrogen. You see that in the light from a star, you know that it has hydrogen in it. Okay? Now, let's take this concept and put it in another capacity. Next slide. I got one ahead of myself. But the idea here is that spectrum, they're not all clean like that. This is a spectrum of an object in space, and what you want to know is which lines are there. You have emission lines, absorption lines all over the place, but I can't look at that and tell you, but we can invent software. We can create a computer program that just looks at it in a matter of seconds, says, hey, here's what's there. It has hydrogen, helium, lithium, whatever, and it's in this amount. And oh, by the way, because that line is shifted by this amount, it's also moving toward you at this speed or away from you at this speed. So lots of information packed in here. Next slide. Taking this to soundscape ecology, which is that you can listen to nature. And it ends up, if you listen to nature, animals, marmots have a signature, insects have a signature, some birds have signatures. So everything out there that makes a sound actually does have a signature. So think about this in the context of those spectral lines and analyzing what's there, where is it moving, whatever. Next slide. Okay, what if millions of people could help us monitor and sound nature in real time? Okay, you have these. There's basically three types of sounds in nature: geophony, biophony, and anthrophony. One is the non-biological sounds, wind, water, etc. The other is the biological sounds from animals, and the third, anthrophony, is sounds created by humans or just noise, because humans are noisy anyways. So these auditory signatures can help us monitor and better understand the health of the ecosystem in the world. So what if for kids and for adults, we created a citizen science project, next slide, where we have 6.5 billion phones out there. They all have microphones, GPS. So what we can do is collect data, timestamp it, locate stamp it, and we all of a sudden can collect all of these soundscapes, upload them to a centralized database, invent the artificial intelligence to go ahead and analyze the signatures. And what we can then do is have millions or billions of people around the world turned into scientists with their phone, practicing science, which gives kids good habit of mind knowing that they are participating in this. And we then create an early warning system for scientists and policymakers in real time. We don't have to wait. We can say, oh, based on the data that we see here, there's a hot zone over here, there's something happening, it's not right, it's not normal. And then there's another place over here. And this does give us tremendous monitoring capability for the planet itself. And it is really the cost of inventing the app, the cost of inventing the software, and the data analysis system. And next slide. So, basically, these are just ideas that I have that we're working on at AUI to advance, to use technology to help educate and integrate the public into the climate science challenge. Soundscape ecology, if you're interested in that, please let me know. Making satellite data and images accessible to the blind. We always find that when we make things more accessible for individuals who have been pushed out of the system, it actually makes it better for everyone. And then also greening up this upstream process of mining and mineral extraction, which is going to allow us to keep having the technology and at the same time helping the ecosystem. And then just brainstorming innovative projects. I love to sit down and just think out of the box. So interested, please give me a call or stop me here and would be happy to talk more. And a thanks again both to the Mary Foundation for the invite and for the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation for hosting a great event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Congratulations for all your work. Now I'm going to invite to the scenario Agostina Lobianco, who is the Development Director at Filantropia Corte Solari. Agustina is a sociologist from the University of Buenos Aires. She has a master in sociology and political science in Flaxo, Argentina, and she currently has a postgraduate scholarship on social impact on climate change from the same institution, specialized in applied consulting based on the surveys and public opinion and research. She has extensive teaching experience in the line of research methodology and social analysis. She has performed in the public and private space, both nationally and internationally, designing and managing inclusive and sustainable program. For 4 years now, she has been serving as Director of Development at the Corte Solari Philanthropy, providing scalability to emblematic projects. So very welcome, Agustina.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you, David and Tim, for framing our conversation so well and giving me the path to walk towards the app that I'm going to be presenting right now. So please, if you can share the presentation. Thank you very much. I don't like to be, I like to walk. I have the same teacher syndrome that you have, you know?
That's why I was holding on to the post.
Yes. So the thing is that I will be presenting Territoriar. Territoriar, it's an environmental education application to value nature, okay? Next slide, please. This is the overall that I'm going to be presenting. Just to frame the conversation, let me tell you that Mary Foundation is based on two understandings. The first one is the systemic understanding of nature. This is to say that we are part of a whole, okay? So even when you change some piece or species of that whole, that makes a complete debalance of the whole ecosystem. That's one statement we based on. And the second one is that the interconnection. We are all interconnected. That is to say that humans are part of the ecosystem, not on top of it, as we used to believe, okay? So in order to make this paradigm shift, we focus first this problem that we had. What is the problem? Climate change. Just to know, in Chile, biodiversity in Chile has been really affected by climate change, okay? But different vulnerability conditions that we have, it was really stressful. It is droughts, different pollution in the air, in the urban areas, especially deserted and semi-deserted areas. But what we need to do was to find the opportunity that Chile has as a hot spot. It's one of the 35 hot spots, you know, that can help conserve the whole species. Why? Because it's a thin and large country. So the whole biodiversity lets you go through a diagnosis by latitude. And that is really rich information that we can provide, okay? Next slide. So facing this problem, turning it into an opportunity, we had this idea. What is the idea? Imagine we begin to link people with the ecosystems of their territories. Imagine we could have a tool to understand phenomena from other latitudes, living in the south, but understanding what happens in Patagonia, let's say. Living in the north and understanding what happened in another latitude. Imagine we apply technology in climate change mitigation programs with a focus on environmental education. So, Mary Foundation came up with Territoriar, which is an environmental education app to promote the valuing of nature. Please.
Climate change affects us all. Global warming caused by human activities is a reflection of the disconnection we have with nature. Mary Foundation promotes scientific development, environmental education, and the relationship between people and their habitat. Only then we can understand nature as an interconnected system in which each species, including ourselves, is part of the whole, each one fulfilling its role in the balance and maintenance of the ecosystem. To achieve this paradigm shift, we set out to turn nature into a huge classroom. Mary Foundation presents Territoriar, an environmental education mobile application that will allow users to learn about biodiversity through multimedia capsules and by living amazing experiences in nature. All Also, thanks to an innovative display of downloadable information, you will be able to continue learning through digital material published at the website. This initiative was born in Chile, a unique natural laboratory due to its high biodiversity. Territoriar has been implemented in different regions along the country, giving access to students and teachers to an innovative and interactive environmental education tool that opens up dialogue with new generations, allowing them to focus on specifications in order to make conservation of the environment and territories possible. Territoriar, science meets technology at the service of environmental education. Discover, conserve, and value nature. Let's go to Territoriar. Learn naturally. An initiative created by Mary Foundation.
Beautiful. Please, next slide. So, the heart of Territoriar is the environmental education. Why? Because we cope with the three spheres in which education and socialization takes place: family, school, and community. Why? Because we need to raise awareness. Raise awareness in society, not only in children, of course in children, but also in the environment and the society that we all live in, because we need to take actions now, not in 5 minutes time, okay? Next slide, please. Okay, how do we do this? We provide to teachers and students and the community tools to connect with nature, okay? First of all, in their territory and in their classrooms. We provide the possibility to use nature as a classroom. That's the greatest excuse we can give to a teacher. Let's go outside. That's our best classroom. We provide pedagogical material to teachers linked to the national curricula. That is to say, as you mentioned before, we give them the whole activity. There you go, do it with the kids. So you can do this in a timeline. In the classroom, you can go out to the field, and then you go back to the classroom and keep on learning. This is a tool which is linked with a website. In the website, there's a sort of activities that we keep on putting and putting so that they can have extra material all the time, so that they can keep on using it. It's not only the application, it's the application linked to the website. One of the funniest things that Territoriar has is that many species and many concepts are in augmented reality. That is to say, we can understand and see the phenomena that you cannot see, such as the water cycle, for example, the trophic chain, a volcano, the different spheres of the volcano, and also you can see different species, birds flying, those in augmented reality. So they really cut your attention. You know, what we need to do is to build a bridge with new generations as well. So we link science with technology so that we can generate a dialogue with new generations. So we have this website, which is Territoriar. In that website, of course, I assure you that if you get inside, you are going to like it a lot. If you have, as Tim said, any doubts of the presentation and of the link itself, of course, feel free to come to me. And in order to understand and link with new generations, from the app, you can link yourself with the social media. So you can take a picture in the territory that you are at, and you can see the picture with Territoriar in there. And you can share it in Instagram, whatever social media you have. Next slide, please. Okay, where are we? We are in 6 natural parks along Chile. The first one is in the north of Chile. The other 4, as you can see, there's one missing, so click it, please. The other 4 are in the central region. No, okay, never mind. The other 4 are in the, Thank you. The other 4 are in the central region in Región Metropolitana. And the other one, it's in Patagonia, in North Patagonia. So along the country, we have set in these 6 spaces this program, which is not only having the QR on site, but also dealing with the community so that they can achieve having this program in their schools and in their community. Anyone who goes to these parks can use this app. Okay, during this year, 2021, last year, we have had like 3,000 downloads, 5,000 visits to the website, etc., etc. So it's been a really, really success in Chile. What are our next steps? Next slide, please. We're going international. This is an international projection that we have to apply Territoriar in Europe, which means going to different countries, generating partnership with different institutions, some of which can provide us with the information on which are the main species in Europe by latitude so that we can incorporate them in the app. And also, looking for partnerships in order to develop from a technological point of view, this application in Europe. So again, as Tim said, partnerships are always welcome.
I'm already thinking of an idea.
You have an idea? We can, okay. Your next bullet point was brainstorming, so we talk later. Okay, so this is it. I hope you really like it. You use it, of course, download it, check it out, and of course, feel free to, to come to me back.
Thank you very, very much, Agustina. This is a really wonderful project. So we really hope that everyone is going to download it, as Agustina said. So thank you again. And now I'm going to give the floor to Juan Dávilas Iverdin. Juan is the founder and managing director of Future ED and serves as a senior consultant for TUSH Invest, where he is a board member of the company. He is also a board member of the prestigious British St. Martin Institute, where he serves as communication and event manager. He's known to be serious and reliable, solutions oriented. And he also represents various institutions at the COP26, the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, where he had the opportunity to meet and interview various heads of state and government and so on. So thank you very much, Juan, to be here, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, the bar is pretty high, I have to say. Thank you very much, Tim, Agustina, Dejan. I don't know, my presentation, if it is there. This is the uncomfortable silence that we all suffer that when we are presenting in front of the floor. This is not the serious part that it was mentioned in the start, so but now that well so let's see what is the presentation. They haven't got it? Okay. I have it here. Sorry, just hold in. Yeah, you got it? Tell me when it's on the screen. Perfect. It's still not there. Okay. So, we're back. Good. Thank you very much. I like also to work on the floor. So, I'm going to make a presentation about FutureEd. Next slide, please. There is something that I discovered last year when I went to Glasgow, and is after Paris 2015, that it was not incorporated in the main agreement, and it was adopted by all the countries, the importance of education in the main text, but on the declaration made by the youth event the week before. And I strongly believe that there is no sustainability without education. And if we are talking about the oceans, education is key. Next slide, please. So, I'm coming from Latin America. I was born in Argentina. And then I have to say that according to the UNESCO, only 19% of the students in Latin America manage to complete the university degrees. The average to complete the undergrad studies is 8.5 years average. So you can imagine, in comparison to the rest of the world, especially United States and Europe. And I'm talking about public and private sector. There is also a very famous saying that it says, don't let anyone to scare you about those 4 years at the university, because those 6 years will become the best 8 years of your life. So having said that, one of the things that we are having is, I'm not going to question about academic quality or so on, but yes, academic design. Because this is a problem of design. And I think that on that regard, we're going to talk in the same lines with my other colleagues. But what we are talking about, access to resources, social environment, and graduation rate. So from 50,000 students that access to an X university a year, only 19% going to graduate. Nothing else. Then we have another problem, because we have to contest that data what is going on in Latin America, how that is reflected about who is taking decisions about our environment. So we ran a study in 14 countries on a local, regional, and national level. And we compared and we found that in these countries, between 30 to 50% of the members of the parliaments did not have university degrees. I'm not going to name them, but later on you can tell me and I can give you more information. So, are our communities ready to ensure sustainability development? Are our institutions designed to operate under forced measure? That is one of the questions that we had during the COVID-19, because these numbers are pre-COVID. So you can imagine that the universities were not ready even to take it on board. And then, do we have enough scientists? Because with these unit rates, for sure we don't. So next slide, please. So FutureEd is an international educational organization born here in Monaco. I developed this initiative when I was a student, when I did my MBA here in Monaco. For technical reasons, we developed it in the United Kingdom. It's an online platform, and the difference is that compared to all the other platforms is that all our content is aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Every content that we have on the platform is aligned with the SDGs. So our mission is to promote a world where Spanish and English speakers around the world can access to high quality education online anywhere, and we motivate people, organizations, and their communities to become the best version of themselves. And as a platform, we want more people to be able to develop their career by unlocking their full potential. Next slide, please. On that regard, 70% of the members of our board are women. 96% of our operations run digitally, and we have signed 25 agreements. We went out to the market last April, the 8th of April. We have a very nice, in the middle of the pandemic, we have very nice opening where the people from the University of Monaco was helping us, but as well, our godmother was Baroness Hooper, who is a representative of Her Majesty the Queen to Latin America, and she's the one going to the presidential presentations. And so we have more than 40 people contributing to the platform, and we operate in 5 countries 100% digitally. We don't have offices. And that is the future where it comes in terms of how organizations operate. An organization is a human construction, not just pressing a button and to getting a fax at the other side. We are talking about something that is a permanent construction in those terms. Next slide, please. So here are the numbers. We can see that with the pandemic, the numbers increased enormously in terms of the industry, in terms of digital content. But this is only the content which is available between 3 to 5%, which is in Spanish. So we decided to create the platform in Spanish and in English because we thought that it's important not only to reach the Latin American countries, but as well 40 million Latinos who live in the United States, whose education is 5 times more expensive than here in Monaco itself. And at the same time, we are also talking to the diaspora of those Latinos living all over the world who has difficulties to integrate into the local markets because they do not speak yet the local languages, calling Dutch, German, French, Norwegian, or whatever. And in that way, we also help them to reveal their career from another perspective. Next slide, please. So what we are doing and what we are talking here is a debate that is already installed. So we have the traditional educational institutions. We have already platforms which are already working, like Coursera, EDX, that were done by Harvard and the MIT already for 10 years. But we are questioning about how this model is not only related to MOOCs, to MOOCs, to LMS, all technicality for delivery online options in terms of design, but how to make it sustainable. Nowadays, we have in our competitors some courses which are only the introduction of the introduction of the introduction, or something that the student will not end up putting on their CV. Because they feel ashamed, but they don't see that integrated really to what they're gonna use in practical terms in their life. So, next slide, please. So we decided that all our content is gonna be aligned with the SDG, but on 3 levels: economy, society, and biosphere. So all the courses, masterclasses, and products that we have, whether they are prepaid, paid, or for free, they are aligned on the SDGs, but on these 3 main columns. Next slide, please. So we do offer different products like MOOC courses, micro-credential, university-based degrees, professional bookings for our instructors, because some of them, they are even exporting their content and they are part of the diaspora, teaching online, workshops, educative events, launch presentation, consulting services, and our publications. So next slide. But here, when we talk about the target, do we need to put a face to who are we talking? So we discovered that we are talking to active population, professional learners. 53% of our students are women. People looking to complete their studies, or professionals looking for a career change, expats and migrants, like I say. But at the same time, people with learning disabilities or mobility difficulties who have difficulty to access to traditional institutions. And also, people looking for a second chance. So we have put a sort of face and a name to who are our target and to who are we talking with our products. Next slide. These are some of our strategic partners, allies, and friends that we have developed in a year and a half. The company was launched in April 2021, but we started to incubate it already 2 years ago. And now we have approximately 10 people. And what I like it about what Tim was saying about this integration of students from different universities is that we mix, for example, interns from the University of Monaco with interns from the province of Buenos Aires. Realities that never will touch to each other. And that we make them working in teams to develop products and to identify opportunities in common. Now we are launching internships not only in Monaco and in Argentina, but as well in Costa Rica, Panama, Spain, and the US. Because we wanted the students as well to be part of the process and to tell us which are the contents that they wanted to learn and which are the difficulties that they are having with the design of the curriculum looking to the future. So, next slide. Thank you very much for your attention. This was my presentation.
Everything. Now we are going to take just a break of 5 minutes and we are going to begin the third panel.
Shall we take a picture of us? This is the official one.
Oh, this is That's the one that goes on the cover of Time magazine.
Right. Yes.
At least in Monaco line.
Now, will we, the presentations that were made, will they be somewhere where? No, well, I would like to get David. Could you I started in engineering. I was going to go and build satellites for NASA, and then sneak on a rock in the space. And then I started playing with
Amazing presentation. Your app sounds really great. You're actually curious to know if you...
before you said.
I think all it means is that we have to go to shooting. That's why I'm here. I think that's the excuse I needed. That's your first conclusion. Exactly. Did you ever consider doing it for the ocean? Like for people that are walking around the like beach, like these are access to because it's such a hidden world for a lot of people because not everybody knows how to snorkel or go snorkel. Everyone's a scuba diving. And if you're scared,
You can start by watching the video.
I don't really feel
that's my next.
Okay, so the thing is, again, we share these two statements you can go to the territory and you choose where you're at. Because you have printing, because the teachers make lots of printing and then you can have installation that has
I invite you to sit because we're going to start the third.
But I'll remember.
Necesito la Natalie.
¿Te ayudo con algo? ¿Querés que presente?
No, me falta la Natalie.
Pero que ahí descansa tú, ¿está bien?
Solo que se dé la Natalie. O sea, que se venga la Natalie. Venga. Oui, alors je vous invite à rejoindre le scénario pour qu'on puisse commencer le troisième panel.
Así là-bas.
Il faut qu'on s'assied parce qu'on va commencer le dernier panel. ¿Dónde está Hans? ¿Dónde está Hans? Michel? Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Estamos hablando.
Sí, So, good afternoon. We are going to start our last panels in order to respect the schedule. So we are talking about oceans and in particular technological innovation at the services of nature and marine ecosystem services. We are going to have 4 great panelists, and we are going to start with Hans Otto Porter, co-chair of the Working Group 2 of the EPCC. So Hans Otto is a researcher in marine ecophysiology. He has established theory and evidence on effect on climate warming, ocean acidification, and hypoxia on marine animal and ecosystem. His effort focus on linking biogeography and ecosystem functioning to molecular, biochemical, and physiological mechanisms, shaping organism tolerance and performance. In October 2015, he was elected co-chair of the EPCC Working Group 2 for its 60th assessment cycle. He is an elected member of the European Academy of Science also, the German Advisory Council on Global Change, and a Web of Science highly cited Researcher 2018 award. Otto, I don't know if you can hear us.
I can hear you very well. Can you hear me?
Very slowly. Maybe can we do something in order to hear better? On entend très mal là. Can you talk again, please?
Yes, I'm here waiting for the signal to start.
Okay, you can start. Thank you, Otto.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks a lot for this opportunity. And we have just, in the end of February, we have released the main report of our working group 2. And I would like to start my presentation with a message, a key message coming from that report. The scientific evidence is clear. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet, including the health of ecosystems. And any further delay in concerted global action will miss the brief, rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. And under this key message, clearly we must get the feeling that we are running out of time. And in this report, we integrated also a report the first report that IPCC and IPBES produced together, a report on biodiversity and climate change in the mid of 2021, where the first time we looked at the issues together and also looked at what would actually help those sides of the story towards a better future. Now, where are we at the moment? Since pre-industrial times, human activities have caused approximately 1.1 degrees of global warming. We are already seeing consequences for people, nature, and livelihoods. And at current rate would reach 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2040. Previous estimates were a little bit more conservative. The good news is that all of this is human-made. Past emissions alone do not commit the world to 1.5 degrees. We can do something about it. Now, in this present report, we then took a holistic picture of the planet, and including human society, ecosystems, including biodiversity, and looking at what is causing the current imbalance, where human society through greenhouse gas emissions causes climate change, which impacts human society itself due to limits to adaptation and losses and damages observed. It also impacts ecosystems, including biodiversity, and also there needs to be limits to adaptation, losses and damages considered. And human society directly through habitat destruction and overuse of natural resources is affecting ecosystems and biodiversity. So all of this is captured in the concept of risk, where we look at how these different things come together. But at the same time, the interactions between these systems also entail positive options. And this is adaptation, mitigation efforts, and both sides, the natural system and human society can contribute here. And human society can do something about ecosystems by conservation and restoration in order to maintain ecosystem services, provisioning services for livelihoods and ecosystem services. What do we need in order to take us into a more sustainable future? And we can talk about enablers like governance, finance, knowledge and capacity, catalyzing conditions and technologies. And then we can say we should strengthen all these positive interactions we have between systems. We can limit global warming, we can adapt to climate change and mitigate, we can help ecosystems to adapt to climate change and contribute to mitigation. And there will be benefits in terms of efforts to conserve and restore ecosystems using ecosystem-based approaches, strengthening the capacity of ecosystems to provide livelihoods and ecosystem services. All of this captured in an overarching concept called climate resilient development, where human health and well-being, equity and justice are being materialized, leading us towards ecosystem health, planet and planetary health. So in a way, capturing all the sustainability goals and taking us into a stable future. That future may not necessarily in all parts be better than now, because climate change is continuing and is having its impacts. But once we stabilize, we can try and improve the situation. What is already happening? There is human pressure on biodiversity that is increasing constantly. conservation efforts have not been sufficient to stem the loss of biodiversity on a global scale. And human-caused climate change on top of that is increasingly threatening nature and its contributions to people, seen in losses in overfished stocks, excessive droughts and on land, heat waves causing mass mortalities on land and in the ocean, especially coastal areas, and certainly also considering the excessive wildfires we had to observe during recent years. There is a strong impact on the biosphere, and one of the underlying principles is indicated here that all life, including us as a species, we are specializing on a limited temperature range, and we are thereby constrained to temperatures, have benefited from the stable temperatures of the Holocene during the last 12,000 years, these temperatures, which we are about, temperature range, I must say, which we are about to abandon. And this certainly temperature range is interacting with others. For the ocean, we can here see that there is an increase in CO2 and there's a development of oxygen loss, which is interfering with the temperature range and adaptability of organisms. The ocean is changing. And from the special report on the ocean and the cryosphere, where we have these projections clearly depicted how things will be going on. There's an increase in ocean heat content, which helps us balance and buffer the current global warming at the expense of increasing temperature. There's an increase in marine heat wave days. There's a loss in ocean oxygen, and there is a decline in ocean surface pH. And all of this differs depending on the scenario used, one where we can stop the release of greenhouse gases and stabilize, for example, pH, and one where acidification goes on because CO2 release goes on because mitigation efforts are insufficient. What does this mean for biodiversity? The drivers of change currently are mostly warming and also warming velocity. And there's the largest changes in community composition that are expected to that, because species, not all species have the same temperature. They interact in certain temperature ranges where their temperature windows overlap. These temperature windows are dynamic, and they're also affected in the ocean by CO2 and hypoxia. And this tells us that not only that temperature sensitivity is involved, this is causing a shift in biogeography that you see here on the left-hand side. Depending on the degree of warming, we see a shift in biodiversity, and we see actually a decline in biodiversity at the low latitudes, depending on the degree of warming. These trends are already setting in. And we see changes in species interactions because not all species respond in the same way. There's ecosystem mixing going on. There's a decline in ocean biomass as a consequence. And there are some places are gaining, others are losing, especially the low latitudes are losing. And here we see what's currently happening there is actually we see biodiversity valleys being expressed due to the degree of global warming that concerns all marine species, pelagic and benthic. And there seems to be a biodiversity optimum at around 20 or somewhat below 20 degrees. So emphasizing again, life is specialized on limited temperature ranges on land and in the ocean, and we are well advised to stop the degree of global warming. So how can we actually exploit then nature or use nature in a way to help us with respect to climate change? One aspect is adaptation. And we want nature to maintain its services, its contributions to people. Certainly, we also want nature to have its biodiversity maintained out of its own right. And that's on land and in the ocean. And there is the general request to support intact and fully functional habitats under climate change and halt biodiversity loss. Around 30 to 50% of the world's ocean and land would be effectively conserved. And Another good news is actions that halt, slow, or reverse biodiversity loss, strengthen ecosystem functioning, can help mitigate climate change, and setting aside the protected areas would actually be one major step in that direction. But a precondition for success is ambitious mitigation. Due to temperature sensitivity that is already playing out, there is a need to stop global warming. Ambitious mitigation needs to halt warming best at temperatures at warming degrees of below 1.5 degrees Celsius. It also entails choices in terms of how we use nature and biodiversity in terms of supporting mitigation. Actions taken to mitigate climate change have either beneficial or harmful effects on biodiversity, depending on policy. And ignoring these interactions that I was simplifying and elaborating on, actually in ignoring this inseparable nature of climate, biodiversity, and human quality of life will result in non-optimal solutions. One of them shown here on the left-hand side, where bioenergy crops covering large shares of land are threatening biodiversity and food security for people. Whereas when we look at natural ecosystems like the mangroves on the right-hand side, we enhance carbon storage with benefits for biodiversity and people in terms of, for example, coastal protection and access to marine resources and so forth. So there's a picture emerging for how things can be done, how conservation can be integrated with climate mitigation and adaptation and societal actions. Treating climate, biodiversity, and human society as coupled systems is key to successful outcomes. And these conservation and climate actions would go in hand across landscapes in cities as well as in rural areas and including the oceans. And what results is a mosaic landscape, and we say landscape, oceanscape, or landscape and seascape, where we see an interspersed mixing of natural areas, natural habitats, and heavily used areas here, aquaculture areas, and similar on land settlements, intensively used cultured areas, as well as interspersed natural protection areas, considering the 30 to 50% conservation target. And this would allow sustainable uses, and it would allow migration of species according to climate and climate variability, and take us towards sustainability. So thinking climate and biodiversity together is important, because if we only do climate actions, for example, concerning ecosystem, food, and energy, we have a lot of these negative interactions with biodiversity. We are hampering protection, restoration, management, and transformation. Whereas when we have a biodiversity focus, protect, restore, manage, and transform, in general, on land and in the ocean, we will have benefits for climate actions. We may have some problem with energy in terms of not exploiting bioenergy plantations and things like that, but we have overall co-benefits between climate and biodiversity actions. So this is a message that is coming out of here, but we are living in a time where the time window is closing because of negative impacts we are already observing, and that will be exacerbating with continued warming. And this is showing us these climate resilient development pathways and the choices we have, either going into a low resilience world or into a high resilience work, where along decision points, if we integrate climate and biodiversity aspects, we may actually be successful to reach conditions of high resilience for both biodiversity and human society. And that is certainly a target that I think we can all agree on. And these pathways are already can successfully navigate through the multiple crises we face. We need transformative governance helping us along the way. We've heard about capacity building, cooperation, preemptive actions, and adaptive and inclusive decision making, and we need strong environmental law and policy. And with that, we have the vision of this taking us into a better world. But successful implementation and overcoming the current implementation gap depends on rapid entry into actions. Ambitious emissions reductions need to be implemented from fossil fuels, but also from agriculture. And restoring a resilient biosphere and biodiversity needs to be a prime target based on the respective conservation goals and addressing justice and equality, eradicating poverty. Overall, we must say that every bit of warming matters and every lost species and degraded ecosystem matters. And coming back to the original message that I started with, the science is clear. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. Our report, I think, offers solutions to the world, and it is over to the world now to use them and to implement them. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Hans-Otto Porter, for this very interesting and clear analysis. Now I'm going to give the floor to Nathalie Hilmy, also IPCC lead author for SROCC in the sixth report. She's the leader of the head of environmental economical at the Centre Scientifique de Monaco. She's also an expert in macroeconomics and international finance. In 2009, she joined the Centre Scientifique de Monaco in that section and collaborated with IAE's environment laboratories to initiate correlation studies between environmental science and economics to better evaluate the socioeconomic extent of impact and cost of action versus inaction with regard to carbon emission. She passed her postdoctoral degree in 2011 about a multidisciplinary approach of sustainable development. Thank you, Nathalie. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Sonia, for inviting me. You asked me to explain about ecosystem services and their evaluation, so this is what I'm going to try to do. Next slide, please. The starting point is the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2005, and you can see that they have separated the different ecosystem services into provisioning, regulating, supporting, and cultural. Next slide, please. Now, if we consider the coastal vegetated ecosystems, I think it's not very readable. You can see the different categories also, provisioning, regulating, and supporting and cultural. And you can see, for example, if I take just supporting, you can see terrestrial, birds, and marine biodiversity maintenance and protection, providing suitable reproductive habitat for marine life and nutrient recycling. So you have the different categories, and inside you have the different ecosystem services by the coastal vegetated ecosystems. Next slide, please. So the next question was how can economic valuation help to conserve marine ecosystems? Next slide, please. The ocean plays a central role in climate change mitigation and adaptation. Ocean and climate systems are inextricably linked, and ocean-based action will strengthen climate action and vice versa. This is what Hans showed very well just before. The ocean moderates global warming by absorbing about 93% of the excess heat and about 26% of the excess of CO2 from the atmosphere. However, ocean ecosystems suffer the consequences of this buffering capacity with ocean acidification, ocean deoxygenation, and many other complex changes in ocean dynamics. Following COP21, interest in mainstreaming the ocean into climate negotiation grew. Next slide, please. Last year, in October, we had a workshop together. You were part of it, some of you here. And we decided to study the nature-based solution, and more particularly in the ocean, meaning the blue carbon. Next slide, please. Because the ocean plays a key role in global climate regulation through uptake and storage of heat and carbon dioxide. This was the starting point. Next slide, please. So it was not so easy to define blue carbon because in the SROC, is the IPCC report on the ocean and the cryosphere, we considered that blue carbon was only coastal, and we have not considered what's happening really in the ocean and the deep sea, even if we have already spoken about the carbon pump, etc., but it was not very clear, the role. So in this workshop, we have tried to include the coastal vegetated ecosystem, but also the open ocean, like the whale and the deep sea. And then we had to find the definition that we wanted for nature-based solutions. So we used several definitions, but mostly the IUCN definition. And we decided that nature-based solutions are defined by the IUCN as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems as strategies for simultaneously solving both socioeconomic and environmental problems. So this was what we decided. Next slide, please. So we decided to study the different ecosystems and see how they sequester the carbon. For that, we had 4 groups. The 2 first were about coastal ecosystems, one about tropical and the second one about temperate. And we discovered that these ecosystems sequester and store large quantities of carbon in both plants, biomass, and in sediments. You have there the definition that we use for coastal vegetated ecosystems, and we discovered that up to 67% of mangrove forests and to 29% of the seagrass meadows and 50% of tidal salt marshes have already been lost. Next slide, please. And the 2 other groups were about open ocean and the deep sea ecosystems. And here we discovered that the sequestration occurs in 2 ways. One, physical, which is dissolution of CO2 in the surface water, and the biological carbon pump. And both have different impacts and at different scales. Next slide, please. And here you can see the group with whom we worked, and it was interesting to study together. And just I wanted to give you some, if you want this one. I wanted to take the mangroves, but it's okay. Oh, okay. Now I just wanted to show you, and thank you to my student David and Marianne who helped me for the slide. I want to show you the ecosystem service of blue carbon. And next slide, please. And one more. Thank you. So here you can see the provisioning, regulating, supporting, and cultural ecosystems services by the mangrove ecosystems. And you can see that we have already some numbers. So it has been evaluated, because most of the time people say nothing has been already evaluated. But yes, there is already something, and you can see the references at the end. And this is for the mangroves. And if we look the second slide, it is about salt marshes. And you can see here also we have some valuation. Some are only about specific places like the UK, for example, and others are more general places. And I think we have a lot to do. Why? Because if we speak about the valuation, policymakers will say, okay, there is a value. And this value, we have to consider it. And for investors also, if we have a value, they will put their money and they will invest to protect and conserve or restore those ecosystems. And we have the same examples for the seagrass, if you want to put the next slide. So here the same, you can see some valuation, you can see the references at the end, so it is really scientifically done. And we have, next slide please, the seaweed ecosystems with a wide and formed seaweed. And the last one is about fish and fisheries, so please the next slide. Okay, so same, you have also some valuation already done. So I think that policymakers have already something to consider, and the investors can already think where to put their money to protect those ecosystems. Thank you.
Now, that's okay. Thank you very much, Nathalie. Now I'm going to give the floor to Michel André, who is director of the Laboratory of Applied Bioacoustic. Michel is a bioacoustician professor at the Universitat Politécnica de Catalunya at Barcelona, and also the director of the Laboratory of Applied Bioacoustic. He is the founder and president of the Sense of Silence Foundation. His research involves the development of acoustic technologies to monitor biodiversity in the marine, polar, and tropical environment, and the study of the biological and pathological impact of human-generated noise on aquatic organisms, the mathematical, physical, morphophysiological mechanism to extract and understand the information contained in bioacoustical signals. Thank you very much, André.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the Foundation Mary to put together this round table. Very important. Thank you to the. Thank you to the speakers who have put really the framework. So my intervention will speak about the technology that is available to perceive life in ocean, and I will probably extend this to the rest of the planet. But starting with the fact that what we just heard about the need to regulate and to provide data to the policymakers is very important, because at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is to provide, as scientists, some data to provide this data to the policymakers. And everything is about perception and reality. What do we perceive, and how do we perceive this? And we create a technology that is a transfer from our own perception and trying to understand what is surrounding us. And in the ocean, the truth is that we know very little, because this marine ecosystem is a place where human beings have not been comfortable with, except when we are sailing. For some of us, some are not even comfortable on board of ships. But what we have done in the past is to sail at the surface, and the exploration of the underwater sea was something that really arrived late in our in our perception of this medium. And the first technology or the techniques that were used, I'm too close to this speaker, this is why there is some Larsen. The technology that was used at the start was mostly based on visual observation of the surface. And we were observing whales and dolphins and trying to understand the behavior with the very scared moments that we had observing them when they were breaching and the cost of breathing. And this constituted for many years the basis of our knowledge of what cetaceans were doing in the oceans, until we were able to develop a technology that suddenly opened our perception to an underwater world that we have ignored. If we speak about human history have ignored the underwater world for many reasons. We can swim, but we cannot stand for a long time underwater. We are not able to breathe, and our senses are not made to perceive the data or the information that is essential underwater. And I'm speaking about light. Our vision is limited to a few meters. Light doesn't penetrate more than a few meters below the surface, and also the capacity of hearing is limited by our own physiological limitation to hear underwater. We're not able to hear underwater. We think we can. Sometimes when we are on the beach, we go underwater, and we are very pleased to get away from the sound and the noise from beaches, and we find this place as a comfortable place because we don't hear much, although sometimes we have some perception of a boat passing by. But this is only a very tiny fragment on what is going on underwater, and this is only when the technology has allowed us to put an artificial ear underwater, like a microphone adapted to water, that we started to discover that there was a world of sound, and not a world of silence that is only true for human beings. We are the only animals on land when we go underwater that are not able to hear properly. And so the technology has opened us this capacity to hear underwater and to discover this world of sounds. And when we were perceiving this world of sound, we also find out that we, as human beings, have introduced sources of noise pollution coming from our activity at sea, shipping, oil and gas exploration, construction of oceanographic platforms, or the harbors, construction of windmills. Any activity that we produce at sea introduces noise in the marine environment, and we ignored it for a century. We discovered it because the technology allowed us to find it out, but for a century we ignored that noise was introduced through our human activities, and that this noise was not only altering the capacity of the animal to communicate, but was threatening their own life. Sound is actually the only support of information that all these creatures underwater in the ocean share, and is basic for the balance of the ocean. Most of them are able to produce sound. All of them are able to perceive the sound. So the key for life underwater is really the sound. And when we discovered that we were contaminating, polluting this channel of communication that is essential for life in the ocean, and extending it to the rest of the planet, to our own survival, because we all know, of course, and we heard it, that if the ocean is unbalanced, then the rest of the planet will be unbalanced, and will be the first one to suffer from this unbalanced world. We discovered that this noise pollution produced by human activity, coming from 100 years ago, had killed biodiversity in the ocean, and this technology was opening us a totally new dimension to understand that the responsibility that we have is not only to understand and open our eyes or ears to this new reality, but also to provide the technology that was able first to make a state-of-the-art of what is going on, to understand the codes that we ignored for a long time, that are the one that manage this balance of the ocean through the sounds, but also to provide solution to able humanity to cohabitate with nature. We are at a point of our history where we are completely disconnected from nature, totally. to my point of view, this has not come a century ago, but probably 150,000 years ago, when we started to articulate a language. That is, we are the only species on Earth that has an articulated way of communicating, and this probably has disconnected us from nature, and we lost this capacity of listening and of hearing the messages that nature is constantly sharing with all creatures on Earth, except us, who have lost this capacity. The technology, which is a combination of artificial ears capable of capturing all these nuances of sound underwater, just like if we were a dolphin or if we were a whale, but plus with the ubiquity gift that we can not only listen underwater, which is new for our species, but also to be able to listen to sounds anywhere in the world at the same time. We can put sensors everywhere underneath the surface, understand the soundscape. The soundscape is an analogy of landscape, and this is constituted by all the different sounds that are essential for the balance of the ocean. So we're not only able to characterize the soundscape in any area, but we can do that anywhere in the world at the same time. So this has given us the fact that we can hear underwater another sense. I was going to say a sixth sense, but maybe we have other senses that we don't know of. So maybe it's the 10th or the 11th, I don't know how many senses we have behind. But at least it's a new sense, the capacity of being able to listen underwater and to hear, but also to have this gift of ubiquity. And this is not only a gift, but this is a responsibility of society, and through science and through the technology, we need to be able to understand, so we can continue exploring the ocean, we can continue increasing our capacity to explore it, but respecting the essential need to preserve this balance, because we know that if we don't do that, the time is short, and tomorrow, in a few years, we might be finding that the ocean is suffering so much from our activity in terms of noise, which is an invisible pollution if we compare it with the visible one that we all know of, the plastic. Plastics, everybody knows that this is something that is not good for the ocean. And we know that the life cycle of this plastic can be 300 years or 400 years until the effect eventually vanish. But sound has a particularity that when you shut off the source of sound that produces this noise, then the effect is gone. So this opens a new and a wide range of possibility to mitigate these effects, producing a technology that is able to, again, provide us with a way to cohabitate with nature, which is the essential way to do it. So there are different initiatives in that, using this technology in that direction, and we are lucky enough to count on Mary Foundation to have started this unique initiative to be able to monitor the presence of whales, which we heard are essential, of course, for ecosystem, to prevent collisions with big ships in their migration from one pole to another in all these oceans. And this is through the technology that we are going to be able to contribute to provide the ocean with a balanced way of exploring it in a conservative but also in a responsible way, in a sustainable, which is a word that has been a little bit overused. It's just maybe like God. We shouldn't use anymore the word God nor sustainability, although it says what it says, but we should find maybe another word to explain that this is a responsible way. We need to be responsible in front of this legacy of nature, and this is the moment to do it before it is too late. So again, the technology helps us to listen to our world and to provide this technological solution to be able to cohabitate with it for some more years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, following Michelle, I'm going to give the floor to Sonia Español Jiménez, our Executive Director of Mary Foundation. Until 2021, she was the lead researcher of Foundation Mary Cetacean Area and the director of the Blue Boat Initiative, with a degree in marine science of University of Cadiz in Spain, a master's in renewable energies and a PhD in marine biology of University Austral of Chile. She has specialized in marine mammals, mainly in the study of the identification, distribution and behavior of whales through the sound. The Mary Foundation leads the line of cetacean research with project aimed at reducing the threat of collision between ship and whale, and this is what she's going to explain. Thank you.
Thank you. You listen me? Yes. Okay. We know that climate change is a reality and we need solutions urgently. Hans explained very well in before that the devastating impact of this climate change. It's not enough to reduce these greenhouse gases. We also need to eliminate from the atmosphere. To do this, the nature-based solutions could be a solution. Reducing the impact of this climate crisis, decreasing the risk of disaster, and giving resilience for our communities. The next slide. In this context, the ocean could be the main partner. We need to stop to see the ocean as a source of raw materials and start including the ecosystem service in public policies, not only to have an effective conservation, but also a mitigation in the climate change, as Natalie tells us. We need to recognize that ocean action is a climate action. Next, please. There are different ecosystems in the ocean that can help us to mitigate climate change. But in my case, I will talk with you about whales and white whales. Please, next. Baleen whales are an umbrella species, and this is because the conservation and protection of this species indirectly affects the conservation and protection of other species within the ecosystem. Next, please. But baleen whales are more than this. They are called ecosystem engineers because they participate in the ecosystem through different roles. For example, they are as food for the predators. Also, they depredator fishes or invertebrates. And a very important role is that they are as fertilizer for the ocean, effect called whale pump. This means that many baleen whales feed at depth, but defecate and urinate at the surface, transporting limited nutrients but essential for plant and animal life in all the levels of the food chain. Baleen whales transport nutrients when they migrate from highly productivity feeding grounds to nutrient-poor breeding grounds. This process also helps combat climate change because they implement the primary productivity responsible to absorb and sequester carbon during photosynthesis. Also, baleen whales store a great deal of carbon. When they die, their bodies sink to the seafloor, where they create a mini ecosystem of life, and after this, carbon is incorporated in the marine sediments and never come back to the atmosphere. Maybe the next, please? Yes. This is because a single whale can store 33 tons of CO2 in their body. This is more than the plants, than the forest, and this is a change, a paradigm change to try to understand the importance that the ocean has in this climate change mitigation. Next, please. Now that we know that baleen whales are more than food, we need to, and we have the science to valorize the marine ecosystem, we have these 4 ecosystem services. First, baleen whales contribution to the food web chain and increase fish stocks. They also apport in the tourism industry And when I explained before, they help in climate change mitigation with the capture carbon dioxide in their bodies and improving the phytoplankton productivity. All of these represent an economic value of near $3 million for the population of blue whales in Chile. Perhaps we know that probably this is not the real value because not everything can be evaluated. For example, whales have an incalculable value for the local community or indigenous community because whales are part of the culture. But the next slide, please. But whales are under threat. Marine traffic, as say Michelle before, is currently the main risk for whales because two things: ship strikes or ship collisions and the underwater noise pollution. To help protect whales, we are developing the Blue Boat Initiative with the Ministry of Environment of Chile, and we present here a little video for the project.
For millions of years, whales have populated the waters from the Antarctic to the Arctic, sequestering 33 tons of CO2 over their lifetime. That's 1,500 times more than a tree. Their bodies absorb the CO2 so that it does not go back into the atmosphere, thus helping to produce one of the main gases causing global warming. As they swim, the whales also provide nutrients to the oceans. These nutrients are a source of microscopic life, such as plankton, which helps the oceans to produce 50% of the oxygen consumed by the planet. It also serves as food for other organisms, creating an endless chain that favors the entire marine ecosystem and human beings who benefit from fishing activities. The more whales, the more fish. However, whales are under threat. Between 2007 and 2019, over 1,200 whales died. This is why the Blue Boat Initiative was born. The Blue Boat Initiative will install and connect the first South American network of early warning acoustic buoys for whale protection. A network of intelligent buoys with a complex system of hydrophones, oceanographic sensors, and transmitters, which will begin to operate in the south of Chile. This is one of the main feeding and breeding areas for whales in the southern hemisphere, thanks to the great supply of food and shelter generated by the unique combination of fjords and the subantarctic and oceanic currents. The Blue Boat Initiative will begin in the interior sea of Chiloé, the Gulf of Ancud, and the Gulf of Corcovado, and then cover the entire migratory route of the whales. The satellite information sent by the buoys will allow vessels to be warned in real time about the presence of whales, so that they can take measures to avoid hitting these valuable cetaceans. These buoys will also make it possible to collect vital data regarding the global warming of the oceans, thanks to the oceanographic sensors that will monitor the health of the oceans. The ocean is an essential part of the cycle of life, and we can help keep it healthy, multiplying and benefiting the whole world. Be part of this unprecedented Chilean initiative. Help us change the history of the ocean and the world.
Well, this is a very good example that how technology can help us to protect the oceans. And also is another good example about the Michelle technology. Thank you, Michelle. And what is this project? Wait, with this project, we want to contribute to the care of cetans, avoiding the risk of collision of vessel with cetans. To do this, we will install and connect the first early warning system for whale presence in South America. But also, we want to evaluate and valorize the ecosystem service of the ocean, starting with the reduction of carbon dioxide stocks in the atmosphere. Next, please. We will be able to detect the presence of different whales in real time through their sounds and send an alert to the vessel to reduce the risk of collision. Also, we will be monitoring different oceanographic variables to study the health of the ocean. This is an example that how we can do this. We have this buoy and we detect different species of whales, and when we detect, we send an alert to the ship to avoid this risk of collision. And also, in the same way, we will have different oceanographic sensors. Next, please. This project involves the collaboration of national and international public and private institutions, as we need technology, science, community, and especially the society participation and policy decision to obtain an effective conservation of whales. We believe that climate policy must be associated with conservation effort. Next, please. And Hans said before, we know that it's time to action, it's ocean action, maybe it's a climate action, and we are in this project. Also in Mary Foundation we have other different projects to try to study and protect different ecosystem strategic thinking in this mitigation of climate change. So if you want, you can follow us and understand more about our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for this beautiful project, and thank you all of you for your presentation. So now we're going to make a break and close this session. Thank you for all of you to be here until now. And you can also view again our panel in our social, right? Yeah. www.fcs.org. .tv, .tv, MMS, sorry. .tv. Thank you very much.